Hi everyone. This is just a heads up. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to eat and wait for people to trickle in. So we're going to start in about 5 minutes. So relax, enjoy, continue conversing and networking.
Alright, and Dante, Sharp, all that's good. For main controls. Alright, you're good to go.
So people are online. Does that mean that if we want audience people to speak, we want them to speak into the mic? Because that's connected directly. Is that right? Or no?
So
Okay.
no one is online. It's
Okay.
just being recorded. But with that said, you do want people to speak into the microphone. Otherwise, it won't show.
Got it. Okay. Great. Yes.
Any other questions for you while I'm here?
No. I don't have any questions. That's it.
Okay, cool. With that said, let me turn these on just in case you decide to speak from here.
Yeah.
Make sure that microphone is on, and then as soon as I'm out, you guys are good to go.
Tony, for about the recording, is there room that has gears throughout, or do we need to?
They have to. So we have two microphones here in case they want to speak at the panel. There is a microphone right there at the lectern. There in the audience. There's a wireless microphone right there if you want to pass them around.
Okay, so I'm happy to do that if we would like.
Well, we
people to
can
run around, or-
we can tag team. That's fine. I
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
It's totally fine. Tell me you're Catherine. Okay, so if I'm like, hey, Catherine,
Yeah.
jump on the mic, then I'll let you know. But otherwise, I think we're okay.
Yeah, however you want to do it, but
Yeah, that's for you,
I'm there
in case you aren't.
for whatever you want.
Thank you, Catherine.
Just turn that off for a second. I'm gonna turn yours off for a second. He got it for me, so. Sure, why don't you all however you want to do it. Yeah. Sure.
There should be no rhyme or reason. Yeah. If they have a question, I was at I spoke at events and I proposed that we have questions and the person How do you? Is there such a thing as this program?
And then when they moved me, as I they then put me on the highway, and I was like, you know what? I'll take the highway. Like I thought, it's only a week. I'll take that. Whatever goes. All right, I'm gonna just start. Here's a
that, and then I'll put this one over here. Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. I am using the microphone, but I'm also a very loud person. So if you can't hear me, there's probably something wrong, but no, I'm just kidding. My name is Ellen Walter. I am from IRC. I'm not International Rescue Committee, but the Dutch Water IRC, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. Today, we are here to talk about the U.S. wash crisis. It's a hidden crisis only because when we think, particularly in the context of conferences like this, that we often think from a global perspective. But the wash crisis is just as prevalent here in the United States. So we're going to talk about the impacts, the opportunities, and the solutions. We have two great panelists, but actually the setup for this is a lot more interactive. We really want to hear also from you and your experience. We want to hear questions as they come up, so don't be afraid to raise your hand during the session. Definitely eat your lunches. Don't feel worried that you're clanging plates and things like that. We know that this is, we've got an hour of your time, and we're really happy that you all came and joined us today. So I just want to do quick introductions really quick. You want to go to the next slide? Great. We have Chuck Chaitovitz, and he is the Vice President for Environmental Affairs and Sustainability at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to give him a second to introduce himself after I introduce Kabir. Kabir Thatte? No, did I get that right? Okay, great. I should have known you long enough, I should get it right, is DigDeep's Director of Policy and Coalition. So I'm going to give them just a quick second for them to introduce themselves, and then we're going to kind of go, I'm going to sit down here, but we'll probably get up and maybe move around the room, or I might during this to make sure you guys all have an opportunity to actively participate in our discussion. So Chuck, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Ellen, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm very appreciative to the UNC Water Center here, the Water and Health Institute, to come here and represent the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. This is actually probably my 8th one of these conferences. So back in the day, I came to maybe the first 7, and so it's really great to be back in Chapel Hill to come to this wonderful event. It really is, a very unique gathering of experts from all over the world to talk about water, sanitation, and hygiene in the context of global issues. But here in the United States, we have challenges as well, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. The U.S. Chamber is the largest business trade association in the world. We represent companies of all sizes and sectors. And something that I don't think many people do know is that about 90% or maybe a little bit more than that are small businesses. And small businesses are located in small communities primarily and disadvantaged communities. And so that really is kind of the heart of where the water access crisis is in the U.S. And we'll talk about some of the solutions that are out there and some of the good data and information that DigDeep has put together. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kabir Thatte. I run policy, external affairs, and government affairs work over at DigDeep. And for those who are unfamiliar with DigDeep, we're a human rights organization based in the U.S., serving the U.S., and specifically focused on the 2.2 million people around the country that lack running water and basic plumbing and sanitation. At the heart of our work are locally led programmatic efforts from the Navajo Nation in the Southwest across the country to Appalachia, with a few members of our Appalachian Water Project out here today. We also run a lot of research, as Chuck mentioned, in conjunction with the U.S. Water Alliance. We found that 2.2 million stat earlier. I'll dive into that a little bit later. And we also just recently released a report called Draining, the Economic Impact of this Water Access Gap, where we found that our economy is taking an $8.6 billion hit every year due to the effects of the water access gap and all of the people that we leave behind. We also work on coalition building efforts, on bringing together folks from around the nation to bring their collective effort, collective energy, and collective expertise so that we can close this water access gap once and for all. Really excited to be with you all here today.
Great, thanks so much. All right. So, Kabir just mentioned a really important report that they just released. I think $8.6 billion is a lot, right? That is an enormous amount. I know that there was also recently a report that was released from the Chamber of Commerce on small and disadvantaged community water fund. It's a funding roadmap. And so, Chuck, maybe you can just start off and give us a little bit of information about kind of the highlights and some things from that report that really, that maybe even surprised you about where we are.
Sure. So as many of you know, for more years than all of us can remember, we've been talking about the need for funding water infrastructure here in the United States. And 2 years ago, November 2021, the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act was passed, and it contained really transformational funding. Just a drop in the bucket. There's about an $82 billion gap investment at all levels of government and water infrastructure across the country. But $50 billion over 5 years is a significant dent in that gap, and much more than had been allocated in the past. And that on top of the regular appropriations and additional funding going to issues around drought and other issues, really important opportunities to address water infrastructure around the country. But the real challenge is that many of the communities that need it most, so small and disadvantaged communities, don't often know where to get started. And so real challenge in terms of not only filling out the paperwork to apply for the state revolving fund program. I mean, the other important thing, I guess, that was contained in the bill, 49% of the funds had to be allocated in terms of grants or forgivable loans. So this is a low-interest loans that go to communities in order to invest in infrastructure. It gives the opportunity for small and disadvantaged communities to access that without having to pay it back. And so important for those communities, but if they don't know where to get started, that's a challenge. And so working with some partners, Veolia North America, the Water Center at University of Pennsylvania, we went and engaged stakeholders from around the country to collect the best of public and private resources on technical assistance to enable those communities to access that funding. It's not a perfect document. We just worked with the people that we engaged. We engaged with a lot of the federal agencies, a lot of academic institutions, some companies, but I'm sure that we missed some things. And so I would consider it a living document. We'd love to hear from all of you. Where are we missing some things and where can we update it so that communities can have more information about how to get started?
Great, thanks. So these publications complement one another. The conversation that we're having today is starting to work towards addressing this really large water access problem and crisis that's going on in the United States. So I want to take a quick survey. How many of you have ever traveled overseas just for fun? Okay. How many of you have ever lived overseas? How many of you are not from the United States and this is your first trip to the US? How many of you have lived or worked in a country in which was maybe not the one that you were born in? Okay, so as you can see from, if you looked around the room, many have traveled across from across the globe, both to be here, but also you've done extensive travel. And you may be surprised to hear that the US has such a stark water and sanitation access issue. So I'm going to turn to Kabir, and I want you to just tell me a little bit more about the issue in general here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I want to paint at the outset of this conversation, Chuck, Ellen, and I are going to talk a lot about data, about statistics, about models, all critical. Some of them are on the screen behind me. But I really want to ground it in the reality that so many families are facing all across the United States. And for those of you that work in the international space, which I'm going to guess is the majority of folks in this room, these aren't going to be surprising stories. These aren't going to be unfamiliar stories, but they are the reality of folks across the globe. It doesn't matter what income level the country might be. These are families in the richest country in the world that are facing it. So from the Navajo Nation, there are families that are driving miles and miles, or kilometers and kilometers, to haul water just to bring home, which they then have to ration for weeks at a time. There are families in Appalachia and Alabama who are straight piping wastewater from their homes into their yards or into local streams, which are access points for other families around the U.S. In border towns in Texas and Mexico, there isn't enough running water to fight fires in the local community. In Puerto Rico, wastewater regularly floods low-income neighborhood streets. These, again, may not be surprising based on some of the countries around the world you live in, but for anyone that is an American or for someone that works in America, this should be really shocking. I know when I first heard these stories, my jaw was on the ground that, in my own neighborhood, in my own backyard, that anybody in, again, the richest democracy on the planet could be facing this issue. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the water access gap is really concentrated across a few different demographics: communities of color, rural areas, tribal communities, and low-income communities are the most impacted. Race has been a very dominating factor in determining whether or not you will have access to water or sanitation in your homes across the U.S. Black and Latino homes are twice as likely as white homes to lack running water or sanitation, and tribal communities are 19 times as likely. 19. And part of why this problem persists and why it's not getting attention on a national scale or an international scale is that it's hidden. A lot of these communities are living with these problems, isolated in the shadows, and it's up to us as the WASH community to make sure that we're not leaving behind any community, whether it's in the United States. And I don't mean to just pick on the United States. Obviously, we have a lot of expertise specifically regarding the U.S., but I've met other colleagues and heard from other folks, including our dear friend Ruth over there from the University of Leeds, that this is an ongoing problem around the globe in high-income nations. This isn't just a U.S. issue. This is in Canada, it's in Australia, it's in the U.K. and beyond. And this really, at the end of the day, is about justice, really helping these communities get to a standard of living that so many of us expect here in the U.S. Start with that framework.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kabir. So we talked about, or we just heard about the challenges faced from this WASH crisis. What about the impacts? So going beyond just like the problem itself, but the impacts on these communities that you talked about, how are they taking shape across the U.S.? And maybe Chuck, we'll start with you, maybe to talk a little bit about some of maybe the economic impacts and some of the other things that you found.
Sure. So we've been working to engage members of Congress on some of our work around the roadmap. And we have a slide in there which is very similar to this slide. And we talk a lot about the economics, that the Chamber likes to tell the business story, why there is a business case for paying attention to this, that the lost income that our country is giving up for not addressing this is very important when thinking about building quality of life and ensuring that companies in these communities are able to function. we address it from that level, that, that risks to the business community and their customers and employees in these communities is important for our country to address. And so I think that's the way that we look at it. I don't know that, that there's any additional data on top of the broader investment data that's out there, but, I'll turn to you, Kabir, to add a little bit to that.
And Kabir, sorry, before you go, just making sure that you also touch on some of the things like the physical, mental, the health, like the cross-sectoral kinds of components, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the data that I was referencing in my answer to the first question came from a report that we put together in 2019 that kind of explored the water access gap and its general impacts on people around the U.S. And the number one thing that came out of it was we really need to understand the economics behind this. Really, water access affects so many different intersecting issues, from public health to local economics to labor and beyond. And in our findings around this study, we found that there were a number of pretty significant impacts that were affecting and went into this $8.6 billion hit that we're facing every year. Enormous physical impacts, whether that's hospitalization or families hurting themselves or not being able to do anything in terms of basic hygiene during pretty significant crises. I mean, just on the brink of or after the pandemic, not the brink of the pandemic. I hope we're not having another one. Hand washing was a key message around the globe as to making sure that we're not spreading germs. But how do you deal with that when you don't have any running water at home? How do you deal with that when wastewater continues to be a health hazard for kids in your yard? And, in one specific statistic, we saw that each year, approximately over 36,000 new cases of diabetes are caused by this lack of water at home. Mental health issues are predominant also. The strain and depression that you can get from not having a consistent source of running water for you, your kids, your family. We found that there's nearly 80,000 new cases of mental health issues every year in the United States alone. Water purchasing is a significant cost across the U.S. For labor, we're losing millions of work hours that families have to dedicate to hauling water or dealing with new issues instead of being able to work, or in terms of children, being able to go to school, or for all families, being able to have leisure, the ability to just live and not have to survive. And time loss is pretty significant as well. Each household approximately loses $16,000 per year in the water access gap. And for a lot of these families, that's income that they may not even be making in total each year. So imagine the economic burden, the physical health burden, the mental health burden that so many of these families have to go through. And, like I mentioned, a lot of these communities are forced to improvise. And human resiliency is astounding. The solutions I'm really excited to get into a little bit later. But, in the wake of this lack of technology or lack of infrastructure in people's homes, they've had to resort to straight piping into local communities just to get rid of wastewater for their home. They're having to find new ways to be able to store water at a reasonable temperature. They're having to think through ways to ration kind of their own water supply so that they can have to decide between food, have to decide between showers and beyond.
Great, thanks. And I hope that what you're hearing, I know from my experience of most of my work has been global, that these are the same things that I'm seeing in all of the communities and countries and places that I've spent a lot of time. I was a Peace Corps volunteer and all of that in Turkmenistan, and all of everything that you just said, the mental, the physical, the emotional and economic impacts of a lack of water was what I saw and experienced in my community when I was there. And so I think it is astounding that we're seeing that also in all of these in high-income countries, and particularly our conversation today in the United States. So Does anyone, before, I want to shift the conversation, but I'm going to pause for a second. But we're going to shift to solutions, because it's great, we all now know what the problem is, but what can we actually do about it? But before I do that, I just want to open up, does anyone have any questions on clarification, or do you have stories of your experience domestically, either research that you've done or something else that you wanted to make a contribution to the conversation? So we've got 3 hands. We'll take those. We're going to go 1, somewhere over here was 2 and 3. So yeah, in the back in the center, raise your hand again. Yeah. And no, that's yeah. So please speak into the microphone, because the session is being recorded. So surprise, it's being recorded. I think maybe I was supposed to say that in the beginning, but surprise, if you need to leave, hopefully you won't. But please introduce yourself also.
Thank you. I'm Amber Barnes. I'm at the University of North Florida, which is in Jacksonville, Florida. My question is, this is all, I think I knew a bit of this, but not these layers, and it is obviously just really astounding when you hear it happening in your own backyard, quite literally. And I want to know, how are we getting these numbers? I assume these are probably still underestimates, but how do we get this data from households where here in the United States, there's an expectation to have access to these things? So there's that level of pride that can lead people to possibly not give the answer. So where are we getting this data, and who are the community partners on the ground that are raising these alarms and saying, here, look here, this is, our residents here aren't accessing these services?
Great question. So I'm going to have you guys answer that while Caroline runs to, we're going here in this 2 lovely ladies on the end. We'll go next, but we'll just hold on for 1 second, and then we'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Do you want to talk about the survey?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, phenomenal question. I'll start with the second part of it. There are a lot of organizations around the country that are doing really phenomenal work that we take direct inspiration from and work directly with. Our own projects, the Navajo Water Project, Appalachia Water Project, and Colonias Water Project, all do some level of surveying to understand what problems exist at the local level to help fill data gaps. We work with a bunch of organizations from Alaska, with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, to Alabama, who has a consortium of their own led by the Black Belt Unincorporated Wastewater Program. There's a lot of really incredible, to that point about human resiliency, there's a lot of really incredible local organizations that are driving solutions that we should be looking to across the nation. For the data side of things, we used for both reports ACS, American Community Survey data estimates that came out of the US Census. And I'll tell you now, those data sources are not entirely reliable. They're very much undercounting communities, particularly tribal nations and households across the US. And the data problem's actually gotten worse. In the 1990s, we were removing questions about water access, about flush toilets in people's homes from the survey, because as we were getting closer to 100% across the nation, like you said, we have this assumption across the nation that everybody has these basic services. Unfortunately, that's what left these 2 million folks behind. The most recent question that we had was about flush toilets in people's homes, and that got removed in 2016. So we're actually going to be looking at data sets getting worse in the future. So the ones that we were using are conservative estimates. This 8.6 billion figure that we established is also a very conservative estimate, and it's far more likely that the problem is actually larger than both of these numbers, but we're going off of imperfect data. And as part of that as well, we actually just took a look at ACS estimates that came out again recently as an update, and I put that in big air quotes for the recording, because it established that things have gotten better with a margin of up to 50% in some cases. So data that's just not reliable, data that is getting worse, because we're comparing data sets about questions that we've previously had before to questions that don't exist anymore. And yeah, well, I'll get into some solutions as to how we're thinking about data in the future, but definitely that's important.
And I guess the other thing to add is this data doesn't even take into account communities like Flint and Jackson, which are only going to get only going to get worse, that we just don't know the water quality problems that are out there, and those aren't getting reported. So those are also issues that will impact this.
So if we can start and take all three of your questions, and then we'll answer those, and then we're going to move from that into talking about the solutions. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Hope. I'm from the University of California, Merced. And I was curious to know more about the link between diabetes and the lack of access to water. Is that an indirect or direct link? And did you know of any research I could read about that? I'm interested in knowing more.
Yeah, for sure. We're actually going to have QR codes at the end of this slide to all of our reports. There's definitely some greater detail about some of those physical health impacts and their linkages to kind of the economic impacts generally. But a lot of that is partially driven by behavior. You know, sometimes for a lot of families that have to go and haul water or purchase water from a store, sometimes the sugary beverages are a more attractive option. So a lot of families that are contracting that are getting from those particular situations because there's, you know, a greater consumption of, you know, less healthy beverage sources than water itself. That's a very simplified version, but there are some greater details in that report for sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Christy from World Vision. I have a question about the impact on people with disabilities, if that's anything you looked at, if the people living in homes that are have a physical impairment of some kind, if there's a particular impact there, a particular proportionality there. And then also wanted to hear a little bit about the proportion of that total number that represent the unhoused, and how you're considering that in your analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So with regards to folks with disabilities around the country, I don't have exact data that kind of specifies that, but we've definitely seen community stories left and right of so many folks that have to, you know, live with a disability and also have lack of access to running water. I know one particular story of a family that was living in the Navajo Nation where the husband, who was one of the main breadwinners of the family, had a leg injury at work, and his wife was unable to pick him up from the hospital because they had to decide between gas money and between using their water for their business. And unfortunately, due to having to ration that component, he had to sleep on the street and live in the city alone for a couple of days until she was able to kind of muster enough money to go and pick him up. And I know I'm speaking anecdotally, but we see this across the U.S. in a lot of these communities. A lot of folks obviously know folks that are living in poverty, the correlation and overlap with folks living with disabilities is fairly high. As for the unhoused population, I should note, so as part of this 2.2 million, we're using the general estimate of around unhoused individuals in the U.S. Around 600,000 is the base estimate from that 2019 study. That is obviously getting worse, has been exacerbated by COVID, has been continuing to spread kind of nationwide. And I should mention that this $8.6 billion figure really focuses on households that are impacted. So it's really difficult to measure the economic impact of folks that are living, that are unhoused without water access, because there's a lot of other layers too, right? Lack of access to food, lack of access to a job, and so on. Yeah.
All right. Yeah?
My question was also,
Can you use the mic? Yeah.
my question was also about the unhoused population, so.
Okay, great. So we're going to shift to solutions, or at least a discussion on solutions. So in each of the reports, you identified a number of solutions. So what do you see as kind of some of the biggest opportunities to really move the needle forward in the U.S.?
Well, so our report focuses really on technical assistance. So how do we get the resources to the communities that need it most, so that they can access the funding that's out there? So we're engaging with various community-based organizations to provide, and our state and local chambers, to provide access to this report and to engage those communities that are deemed small and disadvantaged. I would highlight that, and you may have seen this, that EPA just announced $500 million dedicated just for technical assistance over the next 5 years. That's unprecedented, just like 50 billion is unprecedented, 500 million for technical assistance, unprecedented. These are the kinds of resources that we need. The challenge is again, folks don't know where to get started, and it's making sure that they know that the organizations that are out there, not just government, but private sectors, NGOs, community organizations, that can be the conduit to get this information out there. So happy to work with all of you to make sure we can deliver the information that these communities need.
Yeah. Well, there's so many solutions kind of around the nation, internationally too, that we really need to learn from local communities and really learn from all of you in the room, as Chuck said, who've been doing this type of work and really moving the needle on closing the water access gap wherever it exists on the planet. From our side of things and looking at it into the US context, we really see 3 big areas as opportunities for solutions. And they're going to be probably very reminiscent of a lot of the work that you all do, but they're concentrated in investment, in data, and in narrative change. On the investment side, so from this number, no single investor that invests into closing the water access gap is going to recoup all the benefits, right? So the market's not going to close this. No single actor that isn't the government is going to close it. So we're going to need greater intervention from the federal government, from state governments to be able to directly tackle closing the water access gap once and for all. And this data that we found in the report as well is also going to be very reminiscent of some of the benefits that we've seen at the international level. We actually found that for every dollar that's invested in closing the water access gap, there's nearly a $5 return. So that 5-to-1 return is an incredible justification for showing that we should be closing the water access gap for a variety of reasons. So we're calling on the federal government, for Congress to really allocate the funds to be able to go into this, because the upfront investment for closing this water access gap is only $18 billion, just as a starting point. That's less than Americans spend on ice cream every year. And I think we can start there as a pretty decent figure to start moving, get the ball rolling. On the second piece, data, like the question that we had earlier, is a really important component to address, because like I mentioned, we're working with imperfect data. We're working with worsening data as time's going on. And what we need is actionable data. We need to understand every congressional district across the US where this problem is happening. Ultimately, we need to get to the place where we have household by household data in every county across the United States so that we can know how to close the water access gap once and for all. And again, that leadership is going to come from the federal government. So one possible solution, as we currently have it right now, there are at least 53,000 independent operating utilities in the United States, with estimates a lot higher than that for some cases. That we also don't have necessarily a central regulatory agency working in the federal level. It's spread across the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, across the US Department of Agriculture. It's kind of spread around. So we're really calling for a water and sanitation needs working group to be able to figure out how to streamline and combine data collection efforts across agencies at the federal level, so that we can understand the location and nature of these household gaps. And ultimately, we really do need to add back questions into existing data structures already. Like I mentioned, with the ACS and the census, we're losing questions as time's gone on water and sanitation access. We need to add those questions back in, simple as that, as a starting point. And the final component, and I'll be quick on this, in other nations, in the international space, a lot of organizations that are working on this problem, we treat this like a crisis, rightfully, right? We call it a human rights crisis. We call this an issue internationally that should be recognized. And high-income countries, for the most part, maybe if they have this level of a problem, don't recognize it internally. So tools and partnerships with the government to be able to close the water access gap once and for all. And ultimately, as part of that, we should be declaring a human right to water and sanitation.
Two or three policy opportunities that are out there right now. So The first one is the low-income assistance for water. So we all are familiar with the energy program that the Department of Housing and Urban Development and Department of Energy run that provides utilities with direct funds for payment for low-income folks that can't pay their energy bills. So we need, I think, the same thing if we're going to improve infrastructure, if water rates are going to go up as a consequence to that, those that can't pay are going to be left further and further behind. So we're going to need some program to do that. In one of the COVID relief packages, such a program started at the Department of Health and Human Services. It just was kind of a drop in the bucket. It's $2 billion, something like that. But I mean, it's not enough money that's out there. We don't really think that HHS is a good place for this program. So in the IIJA, we included a pilot program for EPA to start for 40 communities. That hasn't been funded yet. So we need to fund that program. The next thing we need to do is we need to permanently authorize that and to have that transfer. Once there's an ability for EPA to stand up that program, it needs to transfer from HHS to EPA. The second thing that I'll mention is that, and this is at the launch for the draining report. The Water Data Act was one of the bills that was raised during that event. This is a federal framework for the federal government to share water data and integrate it. Something that, as many of you, I'm sure, have been working on this for many years, have been calling for why isn't the federal government doing this and having open data sources that can be easily interoperable among agencies. This bill is going to set that up. There's an opportunity to put that in the Farm Bill. So the Farm Bill it's a must-pass bill that passes supposedly every 5 years. Now I think we're in uncharted territory because a lot of the programs expired on September 30th. Now we don't have a functioning government, and we haven't talked about that yet. And so really challenging for a whole host of issues for rural development, not to mention this opportunity to put this water data component into that bill. So I'll stop there. We can talk about some more.
So just on that non-functioning U.S. government comment, there is a session later this week that talks about what can we do about that? Do you know the session day and time?
It's tomorrow, noon, in this room.
Excellent, tomorrow noon in this room, if you want to talk more about that. But we're gonna bypass that at this moment in time.
It's a really interesting conversation.
Yes, it is great, but not exactly what we're talking about right now. There were a lot of proposals and a lot of discussions that I've heard, since the day and a half that we've been together around decentralized solutions. And so can you, I'm going to start with you, Kabir, if you could just talk about what do you see as the feasibility of those decentralized solutions? You and I have had lots of conversations about the role of state government, the role of community governments, and so much of those decision-making processes happen at those levels. So do you see that there's feasibility in kind of looking at decentralized types of solutions?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it was during the plenary session where they were mentioning that, there's really no one-size-fits-all solutions. I think as practitioners and experts around the room, you all know that absolutely is the case. There's not a single magical technology that we can deploy in every individual household or in communities around the world, and absolutely the same is the case with the U.S. I think the U.S. has some of the greatest geographical diversity around the world with how many different environments people really live in. And a lot of the places that we at DigDeep work in topography, the area where people live in, it's not feasible to rely on a centralized system or a central well or even individual household systems in some cases. So traditional utility services don't make sense under those contexts. in Alaska, all the way the other corner of the United States, permafrost is a major issue that is not feasible for any systems there because it requires systems to be movable if residents are relocating or forced to relocate due to other issues caused by climate change. We really need to embrace decentralized technologies. We need to embrace new technologies and funding and opportunity for it. And considering as part of that as well, in the US, we're seeing a really declining workforce across the water space. And as part of all this, as we're investing and embracing new technologies, we also need to be embracing and investing in our workforce and the people that are behind creating and maintaining these systems for long periods of time. Because it's great to consider the application of new technology, but we can't do it without people also keeping up with the application and understanding how it works over time. I think one unique model that we do at DigDeep as part of our individual home water systems, which we primarily employ on the Navajo Nation. These are individual per home, they're solar powered. It is a water hauling system because most of these homes just don't have access to any running water. We do a basic level of education for homeowners and folks that are learn how to maintain these systems and do basic repairs. And while that's a good start, we need to be able to see that invested on a federal level, on a state level, and towards everybody that is kind of working on new decentralized technologies or new other innovative technologies like rainwater catchment systems or atmospheric water generation down the line.
Great. So I just want to open up to all of you guys. Are there solutions that you know of or solutions that you've heard about or that you've researched that you think are really interesting? Also, do you have any questions about some of the solutions or things that were proposed here? We've got, some more time for that, so.
Christopher Lindsay, do you want to talk a little bit about the incentives for filters and decentralized systems?
Christopher, why don't you talk about those things? When you know people on the panel, you get roped into sharing your amazing information. Thanks, Chris.
I'm so sorry, I was distracted for just 1 second. What's the nature of it?
Chuck, go ahead, say it again.
We just talked a little bit about decentralized solutions, and you've been advocating for incentives and tax credits that might be helpful in households accessing those technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing from our perspective is obviously there's not enough funding that's going to these impoverished communities to be able to install and maintain these systems, both on the sanitation side and also just because a lot of these disadvantaged communities have unclean water. They're on small disadvantaged systems, and so the need for like filtration technologies, or they're on well systems where they're pulling up uranium or who knows what contaminants. So there's a real need to get the right technology into these households and provide a needed solution. One of those options is that under actually we're arguing there's an act that's been introduced in Congress called the Healthy H2O Act, which would provide water filtration technologies. I know there's a group of stakeholders, Apple included, that's pushing to get that into the Farm Bill. Again, would just provide, it would boost up kind of the rural development program at USDA to better incorporate these systems. And the big thing that we're also pushing for is there's also been a program that's been authorized at EPA, looking at water, a grant program for decentralized systems. USDA is great, but the rural development program has some limitations in terms of the populations that can access it. And so an EPA program would kind of remove some of those restrictions and really kind of broaden who could have access to those funds. So there are some great policies and incentives out there. We just need Congress to pass a bill, and we need to pass this bill. So.
Great. And can you just tell us who you are?
Christopher Lindsay with IAP.
Great, thanks. Please.
Thanks. Laura McDonald from the Mortensen Center at CU Boulder. I will be at the Dig Deep 1:30 session, but some of you might be interested in going to the CAT lecture. I don't think it's a technology that will necessarily address at the household level. I had kind of gotten tired of reinvent the toilet and didn't think it was possible to think about a technology to solve many of the challenges faced by sanitation, because it is such a systemic issue. But what Dr. Ye has developed is quite interesting from a technological perspective and in low resource contexts. Not at the household level still, but I would encourage those of you who aren't interested in DigDeep session to go to the CAP lecture.
Everybody
Great.
should be interested in DigDeep session for the record.
Yes.
And Dr. Ye did not pay me to say this.
Other questions or comments? We've got one in the back. Please go ahead.
Yeah, ouch.
Hi, my name is Cyril. I am a PhD student at UMass Harris, but I grew up in a small rural community. We have well and septic, and kind of just wanted to get some opinions as well as like an answer, because so we're fully responsible for like managing our own systems. There's no education around it. Anytime anything breaks, there is no one to notify, and it is our responsibility to repair those things, both from a finance and knowledge perspective. However, based on the region, both in terms of like the soil makeup, so we have a lot of limestone and obviously chemical farm contaminants, as well as we live semi-remote, so it wouldn't necessarily be feasible to send like pipe utility water. That wouldn't necessarily be your most economic option. So kind of how are you managing these issues when you have decentralized systems that you're putting in place without like overburdening generally an already burdened at the bare minimum cost population?
Great. So before I turn over to our lovely panelists for their comments, I am not sure if this program is still going or not, but New Mexico had one of the most robust circuit rider programs that was providing that operation and maintenance to small household systems, as well as small systems that were community-based. I only say that because I honestly have no idea. It's been a while since I was engaged with the work that was happening there, but I think that circuit rider programs in Latin America have been pretty successful as well, and so it might be something that that we start to take a deeper look at. And if you don't know what a circuit rider is, it's basically a person who goes around and checks on the systems and provides their phone number and things like that. You see them also across Africa and Asia. You'll see like phone numbers written on the side of the wall of like, this is the maintenance person that you can call. And so I think that there are some solutions that we might be able to learn also from the global community that we can potentially apply. So I'll turn over to you guys for any other thoughts on that.
I would just add that, so the National Rural Water Association also has a circuit rider program for their members. It's not individual households, so I don't know that that would address your specific issue, but there are circuit riders that are out there working on these issues. It's a great question. I think it's certainly something from a Christopher?
Oh, you can finish your thought.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
I think one of the great examples,
yeah.
comes from Alabama.
We just want to use the mic so that it can be recorded, sorry. I know you have a very robust, loud voice, but yeah.
I think a great example, and there's a number of partners who are involved with this, comes from Alabama. The Black Belt Unincorporated Wastewater Program, where the community set up a community organization for kind of dealing with this. Lowndes County has a disproportionate number of decentralized systems and a number of homes that are just open pipe, so there's a need to install more systems. Systems fail because of soil conditions. And so they set up a program where they can actually, the program itself goes in with subsidization, installs the systems, and then they regularly maintain and those systems moving forward. And the homeowners pay a nominal, monthly fee. They pay part of the, just a portion of the upfront capital expense, and they pay a monthly fee, for that service. It's almost like a utility for decentralized systems. And I think that's, a great model. Obviously, that's unique to Alabama, but I think they're also looking at how do you
Scale.
scale it. do have the local utility get into kind of some extent as a centralized business and run a decentralized program where they would do similar things? Or what does that community look like?
Great.
Yeah,
Kabir.
absolutely. And as part of that, one thing that we work on is ensuring that organizations from around the U.S. are able to learn from one another and take these solutions, just like the Black Belt Unincorporated wastewater programs, lead here, like programs that already exist with rural water, and try to apply them in their own context. So I know that was a subject of previous conversation as part of a decentralized wastewater cohort that we had put together with organizations from Alaska, from New York, from the Navajo Nation and beyond, to kind of learn from one another. And I think I'll say is just like another point on this is that a lot of this onus, a lot of this is going to be accomplished through partnership with government and local organizations. And what's going to be important at the end of the day, to your point, is it's good to have a lot of this funding. It's good to have new technology invested. It's good to invest in the workforce. But unless we're learning from the local context and the local community that needs it the most and how they, are best going to need to be equipped with this new technology and how they can move forward with that, we're not going to be able to do any system really any justice and not overburden them unless we're working directly hand in hand with either organizations like the BBUWP or with other local organizations that really have that local expertise as well. Also, did you say you went to UMass Amherst? You go to UMass Amherst? Go UMass. I went there undergrad.
So we have time for one more question, and then we're going to start to wrap up. Go ahead.
More comment than a question. My name is Gene Raven. I work for Aqua Research. We produce disinfection equipment that utilizes common salt and converts it into bleach, sodium hypochlorite. And one of the things I wanted to address was the ability to remotely provide maintenance services or monitor. So all of our systems are set up with Wi-Fi and GPS. I can look at my cell phone right now and look at all of our systems in Ghana and Uganda, and I can tell you which ones are running, and if they aren't, why they are not. And so that could address some of the issues that you have. And many times we'll get email and say, my system's down, what should I do? And we can actually troubleshoot over email or have a phone call or what have you. And many times it's something very simple, but when by the fact that we have the internet access and almost everybody has at least cell phone access, that we should be able to transfer that. But it's very simple systems. We learn how to do it more in the developing world, Africa, Haiti, and now we're actually applying it in the U.S. We have a system we just set up in New Mexico. You mentioned that in the Pueblo Nation, and it's for a potable water system that we just started up about a month ago, and it just started running, and it's running pretty well. So just wanted to mention there are options with technology to provide services.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we have only a couple minutes left because I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity for a health break before they go to their 1:30 session. Very important. And so we heard a lot of really great content, and I appreciate all of the audience participation. There were great conversations about the challenges as well as potentially some solutions around data. A lot of conversations around scale that I think we really need to continue those discussions. A lot of the solutions are localized, but how do we scale them and replicate them in other places or adapt them if replication isn't an option? A lot around finance and potential opportunities for finance. But I'm biased because I come from an advocacy background, so I love all of the conversations about the policy. So I want to turn back for last comments about what can people actually do, knowing that maybe advocacy is one of those aspects, getting involved in some way, shape, or form, and recognition that a lot of people are coming from an international perspective. What is it that they could do to contribute to these solutions and helping to close that WASH access gap, including maybe putting up our last slide with the links to the report. So, yes, Chuck, maybe we'll start with you and then Kabir.
Sure. So I need your help. If you have take a look at the report by getting the QR, and then if you have resources, if it's not, if there's something in there that's not correct, let's make that addition. And then the second thing is, let's include some of the solutions that we talked about today in the Farm Bill, and let's pass it. And so we need your help in order to advocate for all that.
Great. Kabir.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that we need to learn from the great local lessons that local communities face every day. You know, they've come up with the best solutions that work for their own communities, so we need to uplift that. That's one space to definitely do that. But one area that we didn't get to touch on too much is that a lot of the technical assistance issues that do exist in communities are because of a lack of capacity, a lack of knowledge, a lack of staff to really support these organizations. So for those that do work in the U.S., we're looking for more opportunities that we can support existing TA, technical assistance organizations, and government partners in that space. But we really see this as a need for collective effort really coming together. I think the keynote speaker earlier today said that we need collective action for collective outcomes, and that is a really key tenet of what we want to be doing in the U.S. What we want to do is build something as robust, as powerful, as knowledgeable as the international wash sector, bringing together solutions, bringing together messaging, and bringing together opportunities that we can harness here at home. And DigDeep, in conjunction with Water for People, who I'm sure most of you, if not all of you know, works in the international space, have teamed up with a dozen other WASH organizations that are in the U.S., focused on the U.S., to build this first kind of movement of its kind, specifically in the U.S. We call it the Vessel Collective. Definitely reach out for more information on how you may be able to be involved. But my charge to any U.S.-based international organization here, or any high-income country-based organization that works internationally, is to also look at the problems within your own borders. I'm not saying redistribute, I'm not saying change attention, I'm not saying water down, pun intended, I guess, in any focus in the international space, because we do need to help the 2 billion folks that don't have water around the world, but it's imperative that we don't leave behind the 2 million here in the US, the 20%, right, of households in the UK that can't afford their water bill. In Canada, the reports that we saw is that if you're a First Nations person, you're 90 times, I said 19 for the US, 90 times more likely to lack running water in Canada. These aren't problems that we should allow to persist, particularly in the richest countries around the world. So we need to work together, hand in hand, in advocacy, telling the government exactly what needs to be done, but supporting them and holding them accountable at the same time. And in the meantime, do what we can to take the expertise and knowledge that we have as organizations in the space, both nationally and internationally, and solve the problem here at home. Because I fundamentally, and I 100% believe, 2 million isn't that big of a number. It's also a huge number at the exact same time, particularly for the people that live in the water access gap. But it's entirely solvable within our lifetimes, and we can do it together. So take a look at your own context and see what you might be able to bring to the table as well. Appreciate you all.
So, excellent. So thank you all for coming. This was a great way, I hope you found, to spend your lunch hour. There is a session directly after this. What room are you guys in?
Windflower.
Windflower. In Windflower, that is continuing the conversation around the U.S. So enjoy, and we're very happy that you were able to join us today. Thanks again to Kabir and Chuck for all of the great insight. So thanks again, take care, have a great rest of your day and the rest of the conference.
If everyone could take their plates,
Take your plates, please, and things, and take them out of the room so that the next folks that will be here don't have your dirty plates.
definitely there's people coming in.
Yeah. Totally.
Thank you very much.
It should be in the Tuesday folder.
Cool. You've ever looked at it before, have you?
Here we are. That is not the whole thing.
Oh,
This is not the whole thing, people.
that's got some of Supriya's in there, hasn't it?
Could
This is the poker
thank you. We need a IT person.
It always seems to be normal. Yeah, I'll go
Yeah.
and find the
Oh, actually, you know what?
IT room. I'll go and see if I can find them.
There's an NRC posted advice on usually agriculture. It's a great, you know, it's a great suggestion. The challenge is that it's a different part of the USDA. So rural development is the part that works on water, and they have technical assistance, but it's not. NRCS is much closer to the farmer. So it's a good suggestion. Okay.
I just ran for the.
No, it's okay.
It's okay.
It
now?
looks like a guy only copied over half of it.
He said he's going to come right over.
Nah, I think we might be good.
It'll still be good to check it anyway, check everything works.
Yes. I think especially if we can ensure that our virtual presenters.
Yeah. Hey, sorry, I'm just trying to transfer it over again. It looks like it didn't all go over
Okay.
previously.
So this is not a flash drive.
That would probably, is this linked to this?
Yes.
Do you have a flash drive on you?
So I just need to find where I put my flash drive from earlier.
So is that, have you sent them in? Is that-
That
So-
they don't, there isn't a
Yeah,
email.
there's no, there was no like sort of overarching Google Drive or anything like that. Let me go grab another flash drive for you.
Let me also send you a SharePoint. Oh, you can grab a flash drive?
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
grab a flash drive. Okay, and do you have a presentation? And if so, where is it?
It's the same
It's all the
presentation?
same Saw you eyeing it. Kabir. CDC, PNG.
Sorry, let me just confirm that the full-size file is there.
Fair enough.
75, yep, okay, perfect.
75 kilobytes.
Yep. Oh, nice.
We're good.
You beat me? Yes. All right, great. And then we also have 2 virtual presenters.
Okay. We will sort that out. Do you mind if I log you out? Okay. There you go. Do you have the names and emails for your virtual presenters?
I think that we got them special Zoom links.
Okay.
Is that the...
Yes, that's the thing that we want to make sure happened. So let's just open this up and see where we're at. You have to leave this meeting to join.